I have watched people walk into my courtroom believing that deleting a file means deleting the truth. I have watched confident defendants smile because they thought a missing document meant nobody could ever prove what happened. But I remember one morning when Karen Mitchell sat across from me, crossed her arms, and smiled after saying something I would never forget. That evidence does not exist anymore. She said it calmly, almost proudly, as if she believed a button on a computer had the power to erase reality. What Karen did not know was that the evidence she thought she destroyed was not gone. It was waiting, hidden inside a backup file she never knew existed. And when I opened that backup in my courtroom, the entire story she created began falling apart. Before I take you deeper into this case, make sure you are subscribed for more powerful courtroom stories like this. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Also, comment below and tell me where you are watching from, because I always want to know how far these courtroom stories travel. Stay with me until the end, because the backup I found in this case revealed a truth that completely changed who the courtroom believed. Now let me take you back to where this unforgettable case truly began. The case of Karen Mitchell looked simple when it first arrived on my docket. A dispute between a homeowner and her former business partner. Karen claimed that Daniel Parker had betrayed her, damaged her reputation, and created false records to make her look dishonest. She was asking the court for financial compensation. According to Karen, she was the victim. She wanted everyone in that courtroom to believe that she had been manipulated by someone she trusted. But after years on the bench, I have learned something important. The person who arrives with the loudest accusation is not always the person carrying the truth. I remember Karen entering my courtroom that morning. She was confident. Too confident. She walked in with perfect posture, expensive clothing, and the expression of someone who had already decided how the case would end. She did not look nervous. She did not look concerned. She looked prepared. Across the courtroom sat Daniel Parker. He looked completely different. No expensive appearance, no dramatic entrance. Just a quiet man holding a small black folder against his chest. I noticed that folder immediately. It was worn around the edges. The corners were bent. It looked like something that had been opened hundreds of times. I have learned that objects often reveal what people are trying hardest to protect. Sometimes it is a photograph, sometimes it is a letter, sometimes it is a folder holding the one thing someone believes can prove they were telling the truth. Karen's attorney began the opening statement. He described Daniel as a dishonest former partner who had manipulated company records and created confusion. "Your Honor," he said confidently, "my client has nothing to hide." I wrote those words down. Nothing to hide. I have heard that phrase many times, and sometimes the people who say it are exactly the people who have the most explaining to do. Karen took the stand. She immediately began describing herself as someone who had been wronged. "Your Honor, I trusted him," she said, "and he used that trust against me." I listened carefully. "What exactly did he do?" Karen looked toward her attorney, then back at me. "He created fake evidence." Interesting, very interesting. What evidence? Digital records, messages, documents. "Do you have proof those records were created by him?" Her attorney stepped forward. "We have evidence that the files existed and were connected to his account." Connected, another important word, because connected does not always mean responsible. I turned toward Karen. "What happened to those files?" She smiled. That smile caught my attention. "The files were deleted. By whom?" She paused, then answered. "By the system administrator after we discovered the problem." "Who was the system administrator?" Karen looked away for a moment. "I was." The courtroom became quieter. I noticed it immediately because sometimes the smallest answers create the biggest questions. I looked down at my notes. Karen was claiming evidence existed, then disappeared. And the person with the ability to delete that evidence was Karen herself. I turned toward her. Mrs. Mitchell, did you personally verify that those files were gone? Yes. How? I checked. Checked where? On the company server. And you are certain nothing remained? She smiled again. Absolutely. That answer came too quickly. I have learned that certainty can sometimes be more revealing than fear. People who tell the truth usually explain. People who are protecting something often declare. I looked toward Daniel. Your response? He stood slowly. Your Honor, I never deleted anything. Then why does Mrs. Mitchell claim the files are gone? He looked at the black folder because she wanted everyone to believe they were gone. That sentence changed the atmosphere. I watched Karen's expression only for a second, but I saw it, a small reaction, a moment of discomfort. The kind people have when someone says something too close to the truth. I asked Daniel about the folder. What is inside? He opened it carefully. Inside were printed screenshots, dates, demands, and a handwritten note. I kept copies because I knew one day someone would say they never existed. The courtroom became silent. I looked at Karen. She had spent the entire morning telling everyone the evidence was gone, but now there was a question, a very important question. If Daniel had proof, why was Karen so certain it had disappeared? I reached for the first document, and as I read the date at the top of the page, I realized something. The deleted evidence was never the real story. The real story was who wanted it erased. I kept my eyes on the document sitting in front of me. The date at the top immediately caught my attention. It was created 3 weeks before Karen claimed she discovered the problem. That detail mattered, because the story Karen presented depended on one simple idea. Daniel created the evidence after their dispute began, but the document in front of me suggested something different. The evidence existed before the conflict, and that meant the question was no longer whether the evidence was fake. The question was why someone wanted it to disappear. I looked toward Daniel. Tell me how you obtained these copies. He took a breath. I saved them before everything was deleted. Why? He looked down at the folder because I noticed things were changing. Interesting. Very interesting. I turned toward him. What things? Daniel opened the folder again. Financial reports were being changed after approval. Emails were disappearing from shared accounts. Meeting notes were edited, and when I asked questions, I was told to stop looking. The courtroom became quiet. I watched Karen carefully. She remained still, too still. In my years on the bench, I have learned that silence can mean many things. Sometimes it is respect, sometimes it is fear, and sometimes it is someone calculating their next response. I asked Daniel, did you accuse Karen of deleting evidence before coming to court? No, why not? Because I knew I needed proof. That answer mattered, because accusations are easy. Proof is harder. I have seen many people enter my courtroom with a story, but the strongest people are not always the ones who speak the loudest. They are the ones who bring records. I looked at the black folder again. It was not expensive, it was not impressive, but it carried something more valuable than appearance, preparation. I turned toward Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, did you know Daniel was keeping copies? She answered quickly. No. Did you ever ask him? No. Did you ever search for backup files? Her expression changed slightly. No. That answer surprised me. Because if Karen truly believed Daniel had created false evidence, why would she not investigate every possible copy? Why would she simply assume everything was gone? I asked. How did you know the evidence had been deleted? She leaned forward. Because I saw the system. Your system. Yes. The one you controlled. She hesitated. Yes. I made another note. The person claiming the evidence disappeared was also the person with the ability to remove it. That did not prove guilt, but it created a question, and questions are where truth begins. Karen's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client is being unfairly accused because she had administrative access. I looked at him. I have not accused anyone. I paused. I am asking questions. He sat down. That difference matters. A courtroom is not a place for assumptions. It is a place where assumptions are tested. I turned back toward Daniel. Why did you keep the handwritten note? He looked at the paper because it was the moment I realized something was wrong. What does it say? He handed it forward. The note was short, only one sentence. Do not bring this issue up again unless you want to lose your position. I looked at the handwriting. Who wrote this? Daniel looked toward Karen. She did. The courtroom changed, not dramatically, but enough, because a missing file can be questioned, a deleted record can be explained, but a handwritten warning is different. It is personal. It shows intention. I looked toward Karen. Did you write this note? She stared at the paper, then she answered, I don't remember. Interesting, very interesting. People forget many things, but they rarely forget their own handwriting. I watched her attorney lean closer, a small movement, a quiet warning. But the moment had already passed. The first crack had appeared. Karen entered the courtroom, believing she controlled the evidence. She believed she controlled the story. She believed if something disappeared from a computer screen, it disappeared from reality. But she had forgotten something important. Technology creates copies. People create memories, and truth has a habit of surviving. I looked back at the documents, the screenshots, the emails, the note. Everything pointed toward a bigger question. What exactly was Karen trying to hide? Before I could answer that question, Karen's attorney presented his next argument. He claimed Daniel was not a victim. He claimed Daniel was the person who manipulated the system, and then Karen made her biggest mistake. She attacked the one thing she could not afford to attack, Daniel's credibility. She looked directly at him and said, everyone knows you would do anything to save yourself. The courtroom went silent because that sentence revealed something. Karen was no longer defending the evidence. She was trying to destroy the person who had it, and that told me the case had just moved into a much deeper place. I looked at Karen Mitchell after those words left her mouth. Everyone knows you would do anything to save yourself. That sentence stayed in the air longer than she expected, because sometimes people reveal their strategy before they realize they have done it. Karen was no longer talking about deleted files. She was no longer explaining missing records. She was attacking the person who brought the evidence. And in my years on the bench, I have learned something important. When someone cannot defeat the proof, they often try to destroy the person carrying it. I turned toward Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, are you saying Mr. Parker created these documents because he wanted to protect himself? Yes. Why? Because he knew he was responsible. Responsible for what? She paused. The missing information. I looked at her carefully. Which missing information? The silence that followed was important because her answer was not ready. She had prepared accusations, but she had not prepared explanations. I looked toward Daniel. Mr. Parker, before this dispute happened, what was your relationship with this Miss Mitchell? He took a breath. We were business partners for 7 years, successful at first. What changed? Daniel looked down. She changed. I waited. Explain. He opened the folder. At the beginning, we made every decision together, but later she started keeping certain records separate. She created private accounts. She stopped sharing information. Karen immediately shook her head. That is completely false. I looked toward her. Mrs. Mitchell, you will have your opportunity. She stopped. I turned back to Daniel. Did you confront her about these concerns? Yes. What happened? She told me I was becoming paranoid. Interesting. Interesting. I made another note, because this was a pattern I had seen before. A person raises a concern. The concern is dismissed. Then the person raising it becomes the problem. I looked toward Karen. Did you ever call Mr. Parker paranoid? She hesitated. Maybe. I don't remember. Again, that answer, I have learned that uncertainty can sometimes be selective. People remember details that help them. They forget details that hurt them. Karen's attorney stood. Your Honor, this entire conversation is based on accusations. I nodded. Correct. Then I looked at him, which is why we are going to continue examining the evidence. I sat down. I turned back to Daniel. Why did you believe the files were important? Because they showed what actually happened, which was that Karen had been changing records after agreements were made. The courtroom became quiet. I looked toward Karen. She did not react. But I saw her fingers tighten around her pen, a small movement. Most people would miss it. I did not. The body often answers before the mouth does, I continued. Mrs. Mitchell, did you have access to the company's server? Yes. Did you have permission to edit files? Yes. Did Mr. Parker have the same access? Yes. So both of you could make changes? Yes. Then why did you immediately assume he was responsible? She looked at me because he had motive, because he had sauce. I leaned slightly forward. What motive? He was afraid of losing everything. I nodded slowly. Interesting. I paused because you also had something to lose. Karen's expression changed, only slightly, but enough the courtroom noticed it too. I looked down at the evidence. This case was becoming less about who could access the files and more about who benefited when those files disappeared. That distinction mattered because opportunity is not proof. But motive combined with action creates a different picture. I asked Karen, after the files were deleted, did you investigate whether they could be recovered? No. Why? Because they were gone. How did you know they were permanently gone? She opened her mouth, then stopped. That was the first time all morning Karen had no immediate answer. I watched her confidence change, not collapse, not yet, but weaken. And that is how it usually begins. Confidence rarely disappears all at once. It cracks. One question at a time. Karen had walked into my courtroom believing she was protected by a simple idea. No files, no proof, no case. But she misunderstood something important. A missing piece of evidence does not always mean the truth is missing. Sometimes it means someone worked very hard to hide it. I looked toward the evidence table. The black folder was still sitting there. But Daniel had mentioned something else, something even more important than the printed documents, a backup, a copy that existed somewhere outside Karen's control. I turned toward him. Mr. Parker, did you save these files anywhere else? He looked at me. Yes. The courtroom became silent. Where? He hesitated. On a backup server. Karen immediately looked up. For the first time, real fear appeared on her face. Not anger, not frustration, fear. And that told me something. Because people do not fear a backup unless they know what that backup might contain. I looked at Karen. Mrs. Mitchell. She slowly looked back at me. Did you know about this backup? She remained silent. And in that silence, I saw the first real crack in the story she had spent so much time building. I looked at Karen Mitchell after asking that question. Did you know about this backup? For several seconds, she said nothing, and sometimes silence tells you more than an answer ever could. I have learned that people react differently when they hear something unexpected. An innocent person usually wants more information. They ask questions. They want to understand. But someone who fears what is coming often does something different. They try to stop the conversation before it reaches the truth. Karen looked toward her attorney, then back at me. No, Your Honor. Her answer was quiet. Too quiet. I wrote that down because confidence had disappeared. The woman who entered my courtroom saying the evidence was gone was now sitting across from me, knowing that maybe it was never gone at all. I turned toward Daniel. Mr. Parker explained this backup. He opened the black folder again. Before I lost access to the company system, I created an external backup of important records. Why? Because I noticed files were being changed. Did you tell anyone? Yes. Who? He looked toward Karen. Her eye turned back. What did she say? I said, Daniel paused. She told me I was being dramatic. Interesting. Very interesting. I looked at Karen. Mrs. Mitchell. Did you ever tell Mr. Parker he was being dramatic? She crossed her arms. I may have. Why? Because he was accusing me without proof. I nodded. There it was, the same argument again. No proof. A phrase people often use when they believe they have successfully removed the evidence. But evidence does not always disappear. Sometimes it simply moves somewhere they cannot reach. I looked toward the courtroom monitor. Can this backup be accessed today? Daniel nodded. Yes. Karen immediately stood. Your Honor, this is unnecessary. I looked at her. Unnecessary? Yes. We already know the original files were deleted. I paused. That is exactly why the backup matters. She sat down slowly because she understood something. The thing she wanted to avoid was the exact thing the court needed to see. I looked toward Daniel. Bring the backup forward. The bailiff collected the device. The courtroom became completely silent. I have seen many moments in my career where people believe they are seconds away from winning. And I have seen those same people realize they were seconds away from losing. The difference is usually one piece of evidence the monitor turned on. A folder appeared, thousands of files, dates, records mans. Everything Karen believed had disappeared. I watched her face carefully. She was trying to remain calm, but her eyes moved quickly, mitching, looking for something. That told me everything. People who have nothing to hide do not search the screen. They watch, they wait, they learn. Karen was looking for damage. The first folder opened, financial records. The second folder, messages. The third folder, deleted communication archives. I looked toward Karen, Mrs. Mitchell. She looked up. Do you recognize these files? No. Her answer came quickly. Too quickly. I opened the first document. A message thread appeared. The date was 2 months before Daniel was accused. The sender was Karen. The recipient was a company employee. The message was simple. Remove the old reports before anyone reviews them. The courtroom froze. I let the silence remain because sometimes silence gives people enough time to understand what they are seeing. Karen stared at the screen. Her attorney leaned forward. For the first time, he did not look confident. He looked concerned. I continued scrolling. More messages appeared, more instructions, more changes, a pattern, not one mistake, not one misunderstanding. A pattern. I turned toward Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain these messages? She took a breath. They are being taken out of context. I nodded. A familiar response. When the facts become difficult, people often attack the interpretation instead of the evidence. I looked back at the screen. Which part is incorrect? She remained silent. I waited. No answer. Then I asked the question that changed the entire direction of the case. Mrs. Mitchell, if these files were gone, why did you know exactly what they contained? The courtroom became completely still. That was the moment the case shifted, because Karen had spent the entire hearing claiming there was nothing to find. But her reaction proved something else. She knew exactly what was hidden. I reached for the next file, a deleted recording, a conversation Karen never expected anyone to recover. And before I played it, I wanted everyone in that courtroom to understand one thing. The evidence was not found because someone got lucky. It was found because the truth had been waiting for someone patient enough to look. I looked at the recovered recording sitting on the screen. The courtroom had already changed. A few minutes earlier, Karen Mitchell believed she was still controlling the story. She believed the missing files protected her. She believed Daniel had nothing left to show. But now the evidence she thought was destroyed was sitting in front of everyone. And the most important part was still waiting, the recording. I looked toward Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, before we play this, is there anything you would like to explain? She sat quietly. That silence was different from before. Earlier, her silence came from confidence. Now it came from calculation. She was searching for an explanation, but sometimes explanations arrive too late. I have learned that people can prepare speeches. They can prepare excuses. They can prepare arguments, but they cannot prepare for a truth they never expected anyone to find. I looked toward the monitor. Play the recording. The courtroom became completely still. The audio began. At first there was only background noise, then Karen's voice appeared. I don't care what the records show. Everyone froze. I watched Karen immediately look down. That reaction told me something. She recognized her own words before anyone else did. The recording continued. Another voice responded, Karen, if someone reviews these files, they are going to notice the changes. Karen answered, then make sure nobody reviews them. The courtroom was silent. Not one person moved. I let the recording continue. The second voice asked, what about Daniel? There was a pause. Then Karen said, he will take the blame. People already trust my version of the story. That sentence changed everything. I stopped the recording. I looked around the courtroom because at that moment, this was no longer a dispute between former business partners. It was a deliberate attempt to control the truth. I looked toward Karen. She was no longer looking confident. She was looking exposed. I turned to her. Mrs. Mitchell, is that your voice? Her attorney stood. Your Honor, we need to question the authenticity of this recording. I nodded. That is your right. I looked at the evidence, and that is exactly why we will examine it. I turned toward Daniel. How was this recording recovered? He answered. The backup saved everything connected to the company accounts, even deleted files. Yes. Why? Because this backup system was designed to preserve previous versions. Interesting, very interesting. The thing Karen believed was her greatest advantage became the thing that exposed her. She thought deleting something removed the evidence. She forgot that technology remembers. I looked back at the recording. Then I looked at Karen. Do you still believe there is no proof? The courtroom became quiet because those were her own words from earlier. The same confidence, the same arrogance, the same belief that she had already won. But now those words meant something completely different. Karen looked away, and that told me more than an answer would have. I turned back to the evidence. The proof ladder was complete. First, we had the documents, then the handwritten warning, then the backup files, and finally, the recovered recording. Each piece told the same story. That was important. Because one piece of evidence can be questioned, but when multiple pieces point in the same direction, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. I looked toward Karen. Do you understand what concerns me most about this case? She did not answer. I continued. It is not that records were changed. It is not even that files were deleted. I paused. It is that you attempted to make another person carry the consequences of your actions. The courtroom remained silent. Daniel lowered his eyes. I noticed his reaction, not anger, not satisfaction. Relief. Because being falsely accused creates a different kind of pain. It is not just about losing money. It is about watching people believe a version of you that is not true. I turned toward Daniel. Mr. Parker, why did you keep fighting this? He looked at the folder. Because I knew the truth existed somewhere. That answer stayed with me, because that is often what justice requires. Patience. Not every truth appears immediately. Sometimes it sits inside an old folder. Sometimes it hides inside a backup file. Sometimes it waits for the right person to look closely enough. I returned my attention to Karen. Her entire argument had collapsed, but one question remained. Why did she believe she could get away with it? The answer was not inside the files. It was inside her behavior. She believed confidence could replace evidence. She believed control could replace honesty. She believed that if people trusted her first, they would never question her later. But she forgot something important. A courtroom does not decide based on who tells the better story. It decides based on who can prove theirs. I closed the folder. Then I looked toward the documents one final time. The evidence was complete. Now came the part Karen never expected, the consequence. I looked at Karen Mitchell one final time before delivering my decision. The woman sitting across from me was very different from the person who had entered my courtroom that morning. She walked in believing she had control over the evidence, control over the story, control over what people would believe. But the problem with the truth is simple. It does not need permission to appear. It only needs the right moment, and that moment had arrived. I reviewed everything carefully, the original documents, the altered reports, the handwritten warning, the recovered backup files, the deleted messages. And the recording Karen believed would never be heard. Every piece of evidence led to the same conclusion. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate attempt to hide information and shift blame onto someone else. I turned toward Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, you entered this courtroom believing that the absence of evidence would protect you. She remained silent, but you misunderstood something important. I paused. Deraded does not always mean destroyed. The courtroom became completely quiet. Sometimes the truth is simply waiting for someone to find the backup. Karen lowered her eyes. For the first time, there was no argument, no confidence, no explanation. Only the reality of what had been uncovered. I continued. The evidence shows that Mr. Parker did not create false records. The evidence shows that he preserved records because he believed they might disappear. And the evidence shows that your accusation against him was built on information you attempted to control. I looked toward the clerk. Judgment is entered in favor of Daniel Parker. The room remains silent. Karen Mitchell's claim is dismissed. I continued reviewing the documents. Furthermore, the evidence presented regarding altered records, deleted communications, and attempts to mislead the court will be referred for appropriate review. Karen sat quietly. The same person who confidently said the evidence no longer existed was now facing the very evidence she believed she had erased. I turned toward Daniel. Mr. Parker. He looked up. You spent a long time trying to prove something that should not have needed proving. He nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I looked at the folder in his hands. Why did you keep those records? He thought for a moment, then answered, because I knew the truth mattered, even if nobody believed me at first. That answer stayed with me, because that is something many people forget. Truth is not always recognized immediately. Sometimes honest people are ignored. Sometimes facts are buried under louder voices. Sometimes the person telling the truth looks like the person causing the problem. But eventually, evidence speaks. I looked toward Karen. You believed deleting evidence would erase the story. I paused. But the story was never in the files. It was in your decisions. The courtroom remained silent because that was the real lesson of the case, not technology, not backups, not computer systems. The real lesson was about accountability. A person can remove a document, they can hide a message, they can try to control what others see, but they cannot control the truth forever. As Daniel left the courtroom, he carried the same black folder he brought in, the folder that once represented doubt, fear, and uncertainty, but now it represented something different, proof. The thing he protected when nobody else believed him. I have spent many years watching people underestimate small details. A single message, a saved file, a forgotten backup, a handwritten note. People often believe the biggest truths require the biggest discoveries. They do not. Sometimes the smallest piece of evidence is powerful enough to change everything. Karen Mitchell thought she deleted the evidence. She thought she removed the proof. She thought she ended the story. But she made one mistake. She forgot that the truth keeps a copy. This case proved that no matter how carefully someone tries to hide the truth, evidence has a way of finding its way back. A deleted file may disappear from a screen, but honesty and accountability always leave a record behind. If this courtroom story reminded you that evidence matters and every person deserves to be heard, subscribe for more dramatic courtroom stories where the truth finally comes to light. Comment below and tell me what you would have done if you were sitting in that courtroom.